Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Abil Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. Wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. La siyama baqiyatillah fil aradin. Ajalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. Allahumma akhrajni min dhulumat al-wahm wa akrimni min nur al-fahm. اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue our study of this section on defects of the tongue from al-Mahajjah al-Baydaa. We reached number 9. Number 9 is about al-ghina wa shi'r, about singing and poem. Ghazali himself says, because previously he has talked about this in another section of the book, so he's not going to repeat. But Mullah Muhsin Faida Kashani brings a summary of that discussion and adds also some Shia Hadith about this. And he says that sometimes listening, because in the past they talked about listening to songs, sometimes is haram, sometimes it's mubah, it's permissible, sometimes can be actually recommended, sometimes can be disliked. So there can be different rulings depending on the way it is done, the content, the impact that it has. For example, he says the haram one, the prohibited one, is when the youths, he especially mentions the youths and whoever can be more, affected by certain music or singing, when they listen to them and there's a negative impact on their spirituality and makes them more encouraged in doing, for example, bad things or haram things, etc. And so he brings some hadith, and he himself as a mujtahid has a kind of understanding that is mentioned in our fiqh books, because he's somehow unique in this. He very much focuses on the content and says that if the content is good, then it can be okay. But we have to follow our own maraja. Now, Maraja who have following today, like Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, normally for them the condition of haram music and singing is whether it suits the gatherings of sinful people and laugh or not. So even if the content is okay, they don't permit if the way it is done, because we have in our hadith that Rasulullah predicts that in future and foresees that in the future would be people that may do even singing with the Quran. Rasulullah says in future this may happen. Sometimes professional maybe singers, the same way that they sing, for example, in the pubs, etc., they may sing Quran. So we cannot say the content is enough. If content is good, it's good. We have to see the final product. If it is something that people who are forgetful of Allah, people who are committing sins, people who want to mix with now mahram and dance, etc., if that's the type, so we should avoid it. So everyone should refer to the fatwa of the al-Mahajjah. But in general, we have to be very careful about music and singing. Why? Because they have very deep effect on us. I put it in this way. There are some foods and drinks that are absorbed quickly, even in a stomach, like alcohol. Even in a stomach, it's absorbed. Some have to take a longer process. Music is also something which is very quickly picked up by our soul. So even if you are not paying attention to music, for example, there's a background music, it has impact on the soul. Even sometimes, sad music, even sometimes listening, too much to, Marsias, etc. If you are not careful, then in the long term, you realize that you have become a very sad person or, hopeless person, because music has this impact. It's not that it's like a scientific discussion that you listen and then you decide whether I want to accept it or not. Music automatically has impact on the soul. So we are not against music as such, but we have to be careful and we shouldn't, take risk, even if it is not haram. Listening too much to music can be addictive and can also sometimes put some impact on our unconscious level of mind. But we are not also against it altogether, Then there is a discussion about poem, about shi'r. And, in the Quran, there is a criticism of some poets, that some of the poets are those that misguided people follow them. So Mullah Muhsin Faiz says there are two meanings for shi'r. If I say poem, then in English maybe poem is not used in these two senses, so I have to say shi'r in Arabic. Sometimes shi'r means poem, means something which has a special way of putting words in an order that has, some rhythm and, some like melody. And this can be for good and for bad. So shi'r, which in this sense we say poem, is good for haq or for batil. There were people who used to make poem against the Prophet, against Islam, against Muslims. And because Arabs especially had interest in poem, so they were influenced, some people were influenced by these poems. These were very, at that time there was no TV or radio. These people were like the media of that time. So if you want to spread a message, these poets were, very powerful. So sometimes shi'r can be for bad reasons, for false things, but sometimes also can be very good. For example, we have Hadees, inna min ash-shi'ri la hikmah. Some of the poems are wisdom, means they have wisdom. Or for example, there is another Hadith, inna lillah kunuzan tahta arshih wa mafatih fi al-sinat ash-shu'ara. Allah has some treasures under his throne, and the keys are the tongues of poets. So a good poem which reminds us of our relation with Allah, of our journey, of moral virtues, is very good. But there can be also negative poem. But sometimes Mullah Muhsin says shi'r in Arabic is used in another sense, and that is a kind of a speech or expression that has lots of imagination, lots of takhayyulat, so lots of ideas in an imaginary way are put there, and decorates things and somehow manipulates your understanding. And sometimes they are not in the form of poem. There is no melody, there is no rhythm, etc. And he says sometimes share, which is blamed, is in this sense. And the pagans who used to say to Rasulullah that he is sha'ir, they meant this, because Quran is not like poem. But why they were saying Rasulullah is sha'ir? Because they wanted to say that his words, they thought Quran is the words of the Prophet, or they pretended his words is like magic, manipulates your understanding without having any truth. So share in this way is the one which is disliked very much. And share in the first type if it is for bad reasons. Then Mullah Muhsin Faiz mentions some hadith from Shia sources about good share, good poem. For example, if we make some poems about Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said, "Man qala fina bayta shi'rin banallahu lahu baytan fil jannah." Whoever makes one bayt. Bayt in Arabic has two meanings. One is couplet of poem, one is house. So Imam said, whoever makes a couplet of poem, baytan, Allah will make a bayt, a house for him in heaven. There is a hadith that someone asked Amirul Mu'mineen, who was the first person who made poem? He said, Adam alayhi salam. When Adam came from heaven to the earth and saw the soil of the earth and its air and its size, and when then also Habil was killed, so at that beginning he made a poem. So he was the first one who made poem. There are some discussions here about whether it's okay to recite poem in the night of Jum'ah, for example, or not, in masjid or not. And we have different hadiths, and Mullah Muhsin's conclusion is that it depends on what type of poem it is. If it is a good poem, it's not a problem. For example, someone asked Imam Raza alayhi salam that our Shia, our ashab, means our companions, means our own Shia people, they narrate from your fathers that poem in the night of Jum'ah, day of Jum'ah, in the months of Ramadan, and in nights in general is makruh, is disliked. But I want to make some marsiyah for Imam Hussein, for Imam Kazim, for your father, and this is months of Ramadan. Then Imam Raza said, no problem, and Allah will reward you for that. So it shows that karaha or dislike is for poem which is for worldly purposes, poem which is not spiritual or religious. Number 9 is mizah. Do you know mizah? Mizah means to make joke. So if you make joke, this can be good and can be bad. To the extent that you make other people happy, this is very good. Yeah? If you make other people happy, if you make them forget their problems. You can bring some smile to their face. This is good. But if it becomes too much, and all the time you are joking and making people laugh, especially if you lose the control, and then it gets mixed with ridiculing, making mockery. For example, someone says something maybe mistakenly, then you make it a joke and you ridicule that person. So these are not good. And also our hadith says that making too much jokes can make your heart dead. Kathratul dhihk tumitul qalb. Because we need to have a balanced position, not to be always sad, and not to be always laughing, and we have to have a balanced position. Sometimes the balance is in what you say, and sometimes it's the balance between your tongue and the heart. So in your heart you have to be a serious person, and even if you make jokes, you have to do it in a serious way, in the sense that what you are doing, why you are doing this. It's not just out of habit. So I can make the intention that I want to make my brothers or sisters happy, and I am careful about the way I am doing this. So Ghazali says what is prohibited is al-ifratu fih aw al-mudawamatu alayh, to do it in excess or to do it continuously. This is prohibited, and it can lead to death of our heart. It can create hatred among people, and also sometimes it damages your honor and dignity. When people see you are all the time making jokes, sometimes they don't take you seriously. Rasulullah said, "Inni la'amzah wa la aqulu illa haqa." I do mizah, I make jokes, but I don't say except what is haq, what is true. There is hadith that once a person may say a word to make the people who are sitting with him laugh, and with this one word he may fall from the star Suraya to the earth. Means sometimes one word breaking someone's heart, damaging someone's reputation, can really lower your position. So we have to be very careful. He mentions some of the things also which are mentioned that as jokes that Rasulullah made. So, for example, someone said that an old lady went to the Prophet, and Prophet said, "All the women don't go to heaven." And she cried. And then Rasulullah said, "But you would not be old at that time." Yeah, because everyone who goes to heaven would be young. And then Rasulullah recited this ayah, "Inna ansha'nahunna insha'a faja'alnahunna abkara." So that basically they would be young. Or for example, someone says that there was a lady called Ayman, and said that my husband is inviting you or calling you, yad'uka. Rasulullah said, "Is your husband the one in whose eye there is whiteness?" She said, "No, there is no whiteness." But Rasulullah said, "Yes, there is whiteness." She said, no, wallah. And Rasulullah said, everyone in his eye has white, So, so he said that sometimes, or for example, another person said to the Prophet, please help me to ride camel, ba'ir. And Rasulullah said, but we help you to ride on ibn al-ba'ir, a child of camel. But that person said, I cannot, move with this. But Rasulullah said, every camel is child of another camel. So, yeah. And he says also most of the time Rasulullah was doing this with children and women who were sad. Even someone saw that Rasulullah is doing something to make Imam Hussein happy. So Rasulullah was, making like a play to make Imam Hussein happy. And a person was there who was called Oyayna. And he said, I have never kissed my children. And he was very shocked that Rasulullah is so much, kind with his grandchild. And Rasulullah said, Inna man lam yarham lam yurham. If you don't show mercy, you will not be shown mercy. So Ghazali says, Rasulullah sometimes, rarely, made jokes to make people happy, for example, but it's not that he was continuously, day and night, making jokes, things like this. The 11th is not mizah. The 11th is as-sukhriyatu wal-istihza, ridiculing. Mizah is sometimes good. If it goes out of limit, then it's bad, or if it's mixed with. But ridiculing is bad. Quran says, La yaskhar qawmun min qawm. Surat Hujurat, verse 11. La yaskhar qawmun min qawm asa an yakunu khayran minhum. No group of people should make mockery of another group. Maybe they are better than them. So, sukhriya is making mockery, humiliating in an offensive way. Sometimes people maybe have some issue, but then they exaggerate, magnify, mention it in order to make people laugh. Maybe someone has an issue with his or her body, or I don't know, the way he speaks. I don't know. They take these small things and try to ridicule people. Or someone makes mistake, for example. And sometimes can be mixed with ghiba, because if it is done in the absence of that person, even in the presence of that person is bad. And if that person is absent, then it's worse. There is a hadith that those who ridicule people, on the day of judgment, a gate to heaven will be opened for them, and they would be said, come, forward. When they go there, it will be closed. Then another gate will be opened, and when they go, it's closed. It's like the way they made mockery of people, then this happens to them. Ma'az ibn Jabal quotes this hadith from the Prophet, which is very important and very worrying. Whoever blames his brother for a sin that he has repented from, he would not die unless he does the same thing. So we should never mention people's problems, etc., as a sense of pride that I don't do such things. This person has done this. Maybe yourself will get the same problem. Number 12 is ifsha'u sir, to disclose secrets of people. And this involves annoying. Iza, iza means to annoy. Iza, if you annoy people, this is bad. Plus, you may endanger their interest, their reputation. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is quoted as saying, if someone tells you something and then he goes or turns away, this remains as amana with you. Yeah? إذا حدث الرجل الحديث ثم التفت فهي أمانة. So unless you are sure that this person was happy that you mentioned to others, you should keep it as amana, as a trust, and don't say to other people. We should keep things confidential. Unless, na'udhu billah, there is a big danger coming. For example, this person told you, I'm going to kill myself. Of course, then you have to find a way to inform, family, etc., to stop that person. But normally, we should keep things between us, not mention to other people. There is another hadith, al-Hadithu baynakum amana. Your conversations should remain as amana. Unless you are sure that this person didn't mind that you quote him or quote her, Because this is discussed in another part of the book about friendship, so they don't have too much of details, and I think it's clear that we understand that we should not disclose what people tell us. Number 13, al-wa'dul kadhib, false promise. Promising is not necessary most of the time. Most of the time, unless something is wajib that I have to do it, then of course I can promise and becomes wajib because I have to do it anyway. But if you need something and it's not necessary, I don't need to promise. But if I promise, I must be committed. Sometimes people promise to make that person at that time happy. I am with you, I do this for you. And later they don't do anything. It should be the other way. You should be thinking carefully when you promise. But after you promise, then you have to do it. You cannot think after you promised, and say, I shouldn't have promised him, I am busy, etc. Before you commit, think about it. But when you give your words, then you have to be loyal. And Ghazali says, our tongue is very quick in promising. But then our nafs finds it difficult to be loyal. So you have to be careful. Otherwise, this can be one of the signs of hypocrisy. That you tell people, I do this for you, and then you don't intend to do it. Yeah? Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladina amanu awfu bil uqud. Surah Ma'idah number 1. Allah says, oh, those who believe, keep your promises. Commit yourself to the contracts you make, for example. In Hadith, Rasulullah said, al-idatu daynun. Al-ida means va'd. Al-idatu daynun means is a kind of debt. As soon as I say, if I say, I give you this, it's like I owe you this. Ismail, ala Nabiyyina wa sallam, Prophet Ismail, Quran praises him for being sadiqul wa'd. Innahu kana sadiqal wa'd. So even someone like Ismail, Allah praises him for being Sadiqul Wa'd. There is Hadith that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said he had made a promise with someone to see him, and he waited for him for 1 year. So for example, if he had gone to a, I don't know, city, waited in that city for 1 year till that person comes. And then that person came and Ismail told him, I have been waiting for you. So he was aware that this person is coming, for example, but he didn't know when. He waited and waited. Ghazali quotes something from the Prophet that a person called Abdullah ibn Abil Hamsa, he says, I gave bay'ah, paid allegiance to the Prophet, and told him that I come to meet him in a certain place. And I forgot that day and the day after and went to him the third day, and he was there. And he told me that I have been waiting for you these 3 days. So we, for our own piety, and also for strengthening the ties inside family and community, and also for building trust, in the larger society, we have to be very careful when we commit to something. It doesn't need to be in writing. Even if verbally I commit to something, I should keep my words and be very careful. So one of the defects of the tongue is not to keep your promise and give false promise. Number 14 is al-kadhb fil qawl wal yamin, to tell lie when you say something or when you make a vow. For example, na'udhu billah, someone says, Wallah, I try to do this for you, for example. Wallah, I supported you. This is very bad. And he says this is one of the very ugly sins. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Kaburat khiyanatan an tuhadditha akhaka hadithan huwa laka musaddiq wa anta lahu bihi kadhib. It's a great act of betrayal. Khiyana means to betray, yeah? That you'd say to your brother, or you say to your sister something, and that person is trusting you. Musaddiqun, like, yeah, he says you are not telling me wrong things. So he has trust in you, but you are lying to that person. This is khiyana. That person is trusting me and accepting what I'm saying, but I'm lying to that person. In another hadith, Rasulullah said, Al-kidhbu yunqisur rizq. Kizb, if someone tells a lie, reduces their rizq, their sustenance. In another hadith, Rasulullah said, وَيْلٌ لِلَّذِي يُحَدِّثُ فَيَكْذِبْ لِيُضْحِكَ بِهِ الْقَوْمِ. Warned someone that says something and lies in order to make people laugh. And this hadith is also very moving. Abdullah ibn Jarad says that he asked the Prophet, Ya Nabi Allah, O Prophet of God, Hal yaznil mu'min, is it possible that a believer, God forbids, makes fornication? Is it possible? According to this hadith, Rasul said, maybe. Ya Rasulallah, hal yakdhibul mu'min, is it possible that a believer tells a lie? Rasul said, no. It means it doesn't mean that fornication is not bad. It means that telling lie is even worse than that. But unfortunately, some of the sins have become somehow, normalized, unfortunately. And then Rasulullah recited this ayah. إنما يفتر الكذب الذين لا يؤمنون. Surah Nahl, the only people who fabricate and make lie are those who don't believe. Abdullah ibn Amir says that Rasulullah came to our house and I was a child and I went to play. My mother told me, Abdullah, come and I give you something. Perhaps mother wanted the child to be with the Prophet and benefit from this. So he said to child, come, I give you something. Then Rasulullah said, what did you want to give him? He said, tamran, to give him date. Then Rasulullah said to the mother that if you don't give, this is a lie. If you promise your child, you should give it to him.
What if she can't keep that promise?
Pardon?
What if she can't keep that promise? Just say she didn't have the dates in the house.
So there is a discussion here that actually Mullah Mohsen has an opinion here that so some of these things can be from fiqh point of view not haram.
Okay.
So Mullah Mohsen says that if you promise a child, from some hadith we can understand that it may not be haram if you are not giving it to the child, because sometimes child becomes very upset. The only way is to, for example, give promise to her. But certainly ethically this is not right, and this is not the sunnah of the Prophet. And maybe even some fuqaha say it is haram. Mullah Mohsen says it's not haram, but certainly it's not ethical. So as much as you can, you must not. And we have lots of hadith about إِذَا وَعَدْتُمُوهُمْ فَفُوا لَهُمْ. When you give a promise to children, you should keep your promise. Prophet Musa alayhi salam said to Allah, he was Kalimullah and had sometimes conversation with Allah. He said, oh Allah, which servants of you are better in action? And according to this hadith, Allah said, the one that does not tell lie and doesn't look after his or her chastity, doesn't make fornication, and is not sinful in his heart, maybe in the sense that in his heart doesn't develop bad thoughts or things like this. Mu'adh ibn Jabal says, I told the Prophet, maybe he asked for some for some advice. Anyway, he says, Rasulullah, give me this advice. To be muttaqi, to be pious, and tell the truth and deliver the trust back to people. Be loyal to your promises and treaties. Say salam to people and be humble. So after taqwa, the first thing is mentioned is to be truthful. Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam said, أعظم الخطايا عند الله اللسان الكذوب. Greatest sins in the sight of Allah is a tongue which is kadhub, which is telling lots of lies, used to telling lies. And this would be coming with great regret on the day of judgment. So, this is about lying. In the next session, we have a discussion about some of the cases in which telling a lie might be permitted. These are like, backbiting. Backbiting is haram, but there may be exceptional cases to be permitted. Here also we'll talk about it, because sometimes people, for every little thing, they say, oh, this is exception, then nothing remains, So we will have a discussion to see. And that in general is when there must be something more important in danger. So it must be something that is so important that if, for example, someone is dying, so saving life of an innocent person, if it's only possible by telling a lie, so here maybe it's permitted. For example, a murderer, wants to go and kill this innocent person. For example, someone has got angry and says, I want to kill, my neighbor, and ask you, if you give him the address, he is going to kill him. So you have to give a wrong address, for example, so that person has enough time to run away. So there must be something very important. Or, for example, in some Hadith says, that if the only way to bring reconciliation, for example, husband and wife have problem and they are going to fight or separate from each other, maybe by telling a lie you can save their marriage. So here it might be permitted. We will discuss it from ethical perspective, and fuqaha in their fatwa, they have also addressed this. But not, for example, I want to sell this car, a few £100 more, I tell lie. I want to sell this house, and for a few £1,000, I tell lie. No, should not be for anything worldly, but for things like saving lives, saving families, things like this. Inshallah, we will discuss in the next session. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.